assistant, David. Oh, those are good-looking moccasins there. Yeah, cool. I bet they're a lot more comfortable than the slippers I have. All right. Take it away, Ruth.
Okay, is this the right place to stand?
Let me get you your mic down there for you because you need to be really close to the mic.
Okay, thank you.
Stand. Let's stand. This one. Here. This stand is in the way? Oh, okay. Okay, very good.
Okay, I brought a painting that I made with moccasins. I brought a painting which I entitled Moccasins, and I'm going to speak about moccasins. That is Algonquin Indian word for shoe. And you probably know that Indians wore moccasins, especially the northern Indians, like the Chippewa and Ojibwe and the Huron and Northern Plains, whereas the southern Indians wore things made of leather, but they were called booties, and they came a little higher on the leg, and they didn't have as much decoration. Right now I'm going to show you a typical pattern for moccasins, and they could vary somewhat, but this is what they usually look like. This green part, which is a leftover poster from last week, is how the sole was made. The Indian would stand on the leather, it would be traced and cut out. The size of the foot plus about 1/4 of an inch for the seam. Then the second part of the moccasin was the side. And this is the slit in which they put their foot. And they cut this so that when they turned it over this way, there was a fringe. There were stitches made along here, which created sort of a little tunnel in which they put what we would call a shoestring, although in their case it was a thin piece of leather or a sinew, which was usually rubbed with melted beeswax so that it was very slippery. Then the third part, the last part, was the top. And it was this shape, and it went here. Sometimes it was cut in half, and sometimes it was just doubled over, and sometimes it was used as a tongue. This was by far the most complicated thing of the whole moccasin. And when an Indian wore out the bottom part or the bottom two parts, the top part was saved and put on new moccasins because it took so long to make. I held up this moccasin, which is the one I painted, and I said to David, "How many beads do you think are on there?" And he thought about 500. So I counted the beads that were on a line, on the red line, and there were about 144. Then, not only the red line, but there is a total of 7 lines, and I assume they each had about that many. Then the stem has 55. I counted the black center, which had about 17, I think, and I multiplied that by 6. And I did the white center, which has 42, and I multiplied that by 6 also. So altogether, there were more than the 500 beads, and you can see why they salvaged them when the rest of the shoe wore out. The Indians were thrilled when the Europeans brought beads because they were easier to work with. Before that, they decorated the shoes by using dyed porcupine quills, which I guess are also hollow, so they could thread through that. Some things I want to say about them. Some of the advantages were that they were so thin, they were comfortable and very flexible, but they were also slippery. And in the summer, an Indian would much prefer to go barefoot than to wear anything on his foot. Also, the moccasins have no heel, and if you are a runner, you know that you come down on your heel first of all. So if you were wearing moccasins, you tried to come down on your toe, and that made it different. When they were wet, they became very stiff, and then left to dry, they were very hard, so they had to be massaged very carefully and thoroughly for a long time before they would be soft enough to wear again. In the wintertime, they were stuffed with rabbit fur. When they were hunting, they were a very quiet way to get around, to creep up on animals. And I'm going to put these out in the narthex so that you can count the beads, or you can look at the picture, see the picture a little more closely. But now people have moccasins. They're really commercial moccasins. I have a pair, I think probably was from Walmart. And but if you have a pair, you'll find out they're very comfortable. And if you have flannel pajamas, they make a very comfortable outfit to wear on a cold winter evening. And I expect some of you have already discovered this to be true.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you very much. Beautiful. Wonderful. Oh, yeah. Super. Super. All right. David's going to remove the painting there. Well, then we're going to call up here next. Next, we'll call up Laurie Williams with Paula Foy, and they're going to do Go Rest High on the Mountain by Vince Gill.
Yes.
I know your life on earth was trouble, and only you could know the pain. You weren't afraid to face the devil. You were no stranger to the rain. Go rest high on that mountain, son, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven shouting love for the Father and the Son. Oh, how we cried the day you left us. We gathered round your grave to grieve. Wish I could see the angel faces when they hear your sweet voice sing. on that mountain. Son, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven a-shouting, love for the Father and the Son. You're safely home in the arms of Jesus. Eternal life, my brothers found. The day will come, I know I'll see him in that sacred place, on that holy ground. Go rest high on that mountain. Son, your work on earth is done. Go to heaven a-shouting, love for the Father and the Son. Go to heaven a-shouting, love for the Father and the Son.
Thank you all very much. That was beautiful, a beautiful song written by Vince Gill for his brother who died. Yes. And now Laurie's
Okay,
going
now
to
I'm going to do something else, and
Laurie's
I'm
going
moving
to
over
do
to this
it's
mic.
a two-weed traveler story, a family tale.
So, you know how family stories can be? They get built on and built on and built on and built on, and when you finally get to your generation, the story has been built on so many times that you're not really sure if it's true or not, and could it be? Well, we've had one of those stories in our family that I heard from my grandmother, I heard from my mother, and we talked about pieces of it, but I never knew the whole story. When my mom died, I was cleaning up her effects, and I found this article on her computer that was a New York Times article called Two Wee Travelers, which is why I'm calling this that. It was a New York Times article published March 30th of 1887. And it was about my great-grandfather and his brother. And that's the story I'm going to tell. Yes, sorry. Then recently, because I have a New York Times account, I found another article on their on their site that was the next day that tells the story a little deeper and better, because in this one it talks about a boy of 10 and his sister when it was actually two boys, and they corrected it on this one. So let me tell you the story of the two wee travelers. First, how many of you are familiar with the Transcontinental Railroad? Yeah? This is a major part of the story, is the Transcontinental Railroad. It was finished in 1869. And the story takes place in the little post-middle 1880s. It begins in New York City. The family of D.J. Bork, who includes his wife, whose name I never found out, and I don't think I'll ever find out. They had their oldest son, Emile, who was my great-grandfather, two girls who I don't know their names, and then the baby, Augustus, who was called Gussie. And I think that's why they thought Gussie was at first a girl. Troubles happened in the Bork family, and the wife grabbed up her 4 children, hopped on that famous railroad, and went from New York City to San Francisco with her kids. About a year later, DJ finds out that there's trouble happening in San Francisco, and he goes to find out how his kids are. He gets on the railroad and goes to San Francisco. Now, he came and got the 2 girls and left with them, and the newspaper said he had to earn some more money to bring the boys back. But our family story says he was well off, and he just didn't want to bring all the kids at once on his own, including baby Augustus. Gussie was only 3 years old at the time. So he left the 2 boys with the mom, who the newspaper says was living in evil courses, a life of evil courses. You know how bad that can be. Oh, yes. So DJ said he would get the boys back soon as he had money. Well, time passed and nothing happened. And the ladies of the Benevolent Society, said the paper, came and got Gussie and Emil and put them in an orphanage. And while they were in the orphanage, DJ decides to get his boys back. He doesn't come to get 10-year-old Emil and 3-year-old Gussie. He doesn't send someone to get 10-year-old Emil and 3-year-old Gussie. He doesn't hire someone in San Francisco to get 10-year-old Emil and 3-year-old Gussie. He sends money for the tickets to the orphanage. He does not send money for food. He does not send money for new clothes because their clothes have gotten really bedraggled over time. They are put on the train with a name tag, not their names, but the dad's name and an address. And the address is not his house. It's his mail address, which is above a cigar shop. So Emil and Gussie get on the train with no adult supervision, and they start to travel. The newspaper said there was a performing group on the train that helped take care of the little boys and fed them and looked after them on the way toward the East Coast. The train stopped in Pittsburgh, and news people were there. And Officer Prendergast was there to get the 2 kids. The newspapers were there because this was the very first time that anyone that young had ridden on the Transcontinental Railroad by themselves. And so it went out on the AP, and every major newspaper in the country had the story of the 2 wee travelers in it, about the little girl Gussie and the 10-year-old Emil. So the Officer Prendergast got them. They had to change trains, but the train wasn't coming yet. So Prendergast found a couple who were on their way to New York and asked them to watch these kids. And they said yes, they would. So when the train came, they got on the train with them and went to New York. Well, they went to where the tag said what it was, and they found out what it was, and people in the building were going all agog, what's happening, and other people were coming in the city going, what's happening, we read about this in the paper, what's happening. So there was a big crowd around this cigar shop, and then here comes DJ to come get his kids, and he took them home. About a year or so later, DJ and Emil had a falling out, a major falling out. We do not know what the story was behind that. I don't think we'll ever know. I just know that my great-grandfather ran away from home. He got on the train. His father had been an engineer. Later, Emil grows up to be an engineer too, so the railroad is real comfortable for them. He got on the train and went to Cobleskill, where that couple that had helped them lived on a farm outside of Cobleskill, the Youngs. And he lived with them until he became an adult. And he met in Cobleskill a young teacher named Lucinda Neer. The Neer family was really, if you've seen my pictures on Facebook, the Neer family liked to quilt a lot. And they gifted pieces of quilting to each other. And the Youngs knew about that. So when Emil and Lucinda got married, they made a quilt for them out of Civil War calico. Lucinda had it with her always. And when she moved with my grandmother after Emil died, she kept it in a trunk. When my grandmother moved to El Paso to be with my mom, the trunk came with them, and it got put into storage. My mom didn't tell me where it was. We knew that there was a quilt, but I didn't know where it was. I got all this stuff back home, and I had this cool little trunk that I put as my coffee table. And I opened it up, and inside was the quilt. And that's what I brought today. I've showed some people pictures of this before. Oh, it's upside down. Let's turn it around. Here, I'll turn it. Yeah, there. There, it's this way. Okay, yeah. There we go. You can see the baskets. Some of the baskets. Here we go. This one's right. It's a fruit basket. Yeah. And what I want to do, I'm going to do this because I don't know if you can feel it. If you want to feel it, I think you can feel where the basket is right where you want to be. This does not feel like that. It's amazing. And on it, yeah, it does. And something that's on it, where did it go? Did it fall off? No, it didn't. Okay, I want to show you. If you have things like this at home, I'm going to just hang it this way. My grandmother took and on all these quilts that I have wrote the story of the quilt. If you have things like that that you want to pass on to your family, make sure there's something attached to it so that the story can go on. This one says, over here so I can get on the mic. Fruit basket. Mrs. Young pieced this quilt out of Civil War calico and gave it to Emil about 1899. That's when they got married. Mrs. Young is where Dad lived near Cobleskill on the old Artemis Young farm. And that's this.
Great story. Fabulous story. The Wee Travelers. Okay. Thank you again, Laurie. Thank you, Paula. Yes, beautiful. So next, Henry Wells said to me, Steve, do you know the Ballad of Tom Joad? And I said no. And so he introduced me to this ballad written by Bruce Springsteen. And we're going to do it together as soon as we get this mic a little closer. I don't like to be so far away from the person I'm playing with. Kind of weird that way, but that's how it is.
men walking along the railroad tracks, going someplace there's no going back. Highway patrol choppers coming up over the ridge. Hot soup on a campfire under a bridge. Shelter lines stretching around the corner. Welcome to the New World Order. Families sleeping in their cars out in the Southwest. No home, no job, no peace, no rest. Well, the highway is alive tonight, but nobody's kidding nobody about where it goes. I'm sitting down here in the campfire light, searching for the ghost of Tom Joad. He pulls a prayer book out of his sleeping bag. Preacher lights up above and he takes a drag. Waiting for when the last shall be first and the first shall be last. In a cardboard box beneath the underpass. You've got a one-way ticket to the promised land. You got a hole in your belly and a gun in your hand. Sleeping on a pillow of solid rock, bathing in the city's aqueduct. Well, the highway is alive tonight. Where it's headed, everybody knows. I'm sitting down here in the campfire light, waiting on the ghost of Tom Joad. Now Tom said, Mom, wherever there's a cop beating a guy, wherever a hungry newborn baby cries, where there's a fight against the blood and hatred in the air, look for me, Mom, I'll be there. Wherever somebody's fighting for a place to stand, or a decent job, or a helping hand, wherever somebody's struggling to be free, look in their eyes, Ma, and you'll see me. Well, the highway is alive tonight, but nobody's kidding nobody about where it goes. I'm sitting down here